Many of us have heard of the Gulags of Russia, one of the most despicable internment camps ever designed. But how horrific were they really? I'm Reese, and in this episode of 5-Minute History, I'll help you uncover just how gruesome and dark Russia's most feared labor camps truly were. History is known to have its dark secrets, and the Gulags are some of the absolute worst. But in order to delve deep into the underbelly of Russian internment, we first need some quick context. The Gulags themselves were started by Vladimir Lenin, but forced labor had been around since the 1600s, most notably in Siberia. These camps began to gain their feared reputation around the time of the Russian Civil War following the aftermath of World War I. Creating the Gulags was a brilliant consolidation of power. Lenin made them specifically for the purpose of political imprisonment. Anyone who he deemed to be disloyal, untrustworthy, or dangerous could be thrown in. Even one's thoughts could be considered against the dictatorship of the proletariat or the working class. Completely controlled by the Communist Bolshevik Party, it gave political dissidents little place to hide. But where the Gulags really took form is at the peak of Joseph Stalin's rule after Lenin's death in 1924. Stalin began to change traditional prisons all across the country into gulags as he instituted the policy of state-controlled agriculture or collectivization. All of the camps can be seen here. Supposedly rich peasants, or kulaks as they were called, were seen as enemies of the state and of socialism and thus were imprisoned. Exiles were even more common. In just 1931 alone, 1.8 million peasants were exiled. Forced labor became the backbone of the Soviet war economy, and it provided over half of the nation's natural resources. But what exactly made the Gulags so bad? At its peak, it faced mass overcrowding in 1953 with over 1.8 million prisoners. This caused disease to spread like wildfire, killing off thousands. Since forced labor caused low morale and thus low economic output, the NKVD, or the secret police, worked them harder than ever. There are many reports of workers getting just 4 hours of rest, with the other 20 being for hard labor. Many inmates were sent to the mines, where they inhaled ore dust all day long. This quickly led to painful and fatal lung diseases. If you weren't in the mines, you might be outside, with barely any clothes during the cold Siberian winters, digging at the frozen ground with a pickaxe. Even worse, food rations were directly tied to how much a worker produced, so weaker inmates died extremely quickly. This is a picture of the inmates' biggest daily bread ration, if they met their quota. The most notorious gulag of them all, Kolyma, was one of the coldest places on Earth. Inmates had to travel by boat during the few months the waterways weren't frozen over. Prisoners spoke of Kolyma as a place with 12 months of winter, and the rest were summer. The ground was so hard and so frozen that it bent metal shovels in half, breaking the already very few tools inmates even had. However, the abysmal conditions go even further. Famine struck the gulags a few years after the state had took control of agriculture, and over 6 million Russians died. Inmates sometimes even had to eat rats or dogs. Interrogations and torture were incredibly common for supposed enemies of the state. Women were treated even worse, with widespread sexual violence and rape. Any and all oral or written complaints were ignored by high command. When the German army invaded during Operation Barbarossa, the NKVD massacred 100,000 inmates to prevent them from being used as German laborers. The camps themselves were set up in squares, with watchtowers on the corners. Barbed wire fence and starvation kept many from escaping, although some tried. The NKVD began setting out rewards for local villages who captured runaways. This was largely unnecessary, as cold winters killed almost all who managed to escape. In the end, death rates came as high as 15.3%, with an average hovering around 10%. Although exact numbers are still disputed, most historians agree on a figure of over 2 million total deaths, with some going in. The Gulag systems were one of the most feared and despicable forced labor camps, and the single largest ever. This has been History with Reese. If you learned something new, please consider subscribing. Thank you.